The day I said yes to Julian's proposal, I didn't know I was saying yes to becoming a pawn in someone else's game. My name is Sophia Ashford, and for 28 years, I believed family was sacred. I believed in loyalty, in blood ties, in the unbreakable bonds between mother and daughter. I believed my upcoming marriage to Julian Harcourt was a love story for the ages. I believed so many things that turned out to be carefully constructed lies, woven so tightly into the fabric of my reality that when they finally unraveled, I barely recognized myself in the mirror. It started 6 months before the wedding, though I wouldn't understand the significance until much later. My mother, Victoria Ashford, elegant, composed, always 3 steps ahead of everyone in the room, sat across from me at our favorite cafe on 5th Avenue. The autumn light filtered through the windows, catching the diamonds at her throat, making them shimmer like captured stars. "Darling, I need to discuss something important with you," she said, her voice smooth as aged wine. I smiled, expecting another detail about the wedding arrangements. We'd been planning this event for months, and my mother had taken charge with the precision of a military general. "What is it, Mom?" "Julian's family business. Harcourt Industries. You understand it's struggling, don't you?" she asked. I frowned, setting down my cappuccino. Julian mentioned some challenges, but nothing serious. My mother's laugh was soft, almost pitying. "Nothing serious? Sweetheart, they're hemorrhaging money. The shipping contracts fell through, and their investments in the tech sector collapsed. Without intervention, they'll be bankrupt within 18 months. The words felt like ice water down my spine. "Why didn't Julian tell me this?" "Because men have pride," she replied, reaching across the table to pat my hand. "And because your father and I are going to help them. We're arranging a merger between Ashford Holdings and Harcourt Industries. It's brilliant, really. Your marriage will unite 2 of the city's most prominent families, and financially, everyone wins." I should have heard the warning bells then. I should have questioned why my mother's eyes gleamed with such satisfaction, why she spoke of my marriage as a business transaction. But I was young and in love, and I convinced myself this was just how powerful families operated. Romance and business could coexist. They had to. "Does Julian know about this?" I asked. "He will," my mother said. "Your father is meeting with Richard Harcourt today. It's all being arranged." That night, Julian came to my apartment, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never noticed before. A shadow, a flicker of something that might have been guilt or desperation. He held me close, whispered that he loved me, promised me forever. I melted into his arms, believing every word. "Sophie," he murmured against my hair, "you know I'd do anything for you, right?" "I know," I whispered back. "And I'd do anything for you." How naive I was. How catastrophically, devastatingly naive. The wedding preparations accelerated after that. My mother became a whirlwind of activity, managing every detail with obsessive precision. The venue, the flowers, the guest list, everything had to be perfect. My father, usually so warm and jovial, grew distant, spending long hours in his study. When I asked him about it, he simply kissed my forehead and told me not to worry. "Big business deals, sweetheart," he said. "Nothing for you to concern yourself with." But I was concerned. Something felt wrong, like a discordant note in an otherwise perfect symphony. I started paying attention to things I'd overlooked before. The way my mother and Julian's father, Richard Harcourt, would exchange loaded glances during family dinners. The hushed phone conversations Julian would have when he thought I wasn't listening. The documents my father quickly closed whenever I entered his study. 3 months before the wedding, I found the first real evidence that my world was built on quicksand. I'd gone to Julian's penthouse apartment to surprise him with dinner. I had a key, so I let myself in, expecting to find him working in his home office as usual. Instead, I found him on the phone, his back to me, his voice tight with stress. "I don't care how uncomfortable it makes me feel," he was saying. "We made a deal. I marry Sophie, the merger happens, and my family doesn't lose everything. That's what we agreed to." I froze in the doorway, the bag of takeout growing heavy in my hands. Julian continued, unaware of my presence. "No, I'm not backing out. I'll do whatever it takes. Victoria has made it very clear what's at stake here. Sophie's trust fund becomes accessible once we're married, and with the merger in place, we'll have access to—" "Yes, I understand. I'll play my part." The The bag slipped from my fingers, Thai food containers hitting the hardwood floor with a crash that echoed like thunder. Julian spun around, his face draining of color. "Sophie," he breathed. "I didn't hear you come in. Play your part," I asked, my voice eerily calm despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "What part, Julian? What deal?" He moved toward me, hands outstretched, his expression transforming into something I'd seen 1,000 times. Warm, loving, reassuring. But now I saw it for what it was. A mask. "Baby, you misunderstood. That was just business talk, nothing to do with us." "Don't lie to me," I interrupted, surprised by the steel in my own voice. "What deal did you make with my mother?" Julian's facade cracked, just for a moment, and I saw something ugly beneath it. Calculation, frustration, the look of a man caught in a trap of his own making. "It's complicated." "Uncomplicate it," I demanded. He ran a hand through his hair, and when he spoke, his voice had lost its warmth. "Your family needed a way to acquire Harcourt Industries without it looking hostile. My family needed capital to survive. Your mother proposed a solution that benefited everyone. A marriage alliance." The room tilted. "You're marrying me for money." "It's not like that." "Then what is it like, Julian? Explain it to me like I'm stupid, because clearly I have been." His jaw tightened. "Your mother controls your trust fund until you marry. Once we're married, she's agreed to release it, and your father will funnel investment through the merger. My family stays afloat, your family expands their empire, and you and I." "And you and I what?" I challenged. "Live happily ever after while you pretend to love me?" "I do love you," he insisted, but the words rang hollow. I laughed, a sound so bitter it surprised even me. "Get out of my sight. Sophie. Get out." He left, and I stood alone in his apartment, surrounded by the wreckage of my takeout and my illusions, trying to understand how my entire life had become a chess game I didn't know I was playing. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I checked into a hotel and spent the dark hours staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Every moment of my relationship with Julian replayed in my head, but now I saw the truth behind each gesture, each declaration of love. The way he pursued me so relentlessly at that charity gala 2 years ago. Had my mother arranged for us to be seated together? The weekend trips he'd planned to my father's favorite vacation spots. Had he been securing their approval? The engagement ring, a massive emerald surrounded by diamonds. Had my mother helped him choose it? But even deeper than the betrayal of Julian was the betrayal of my mother. She had orchestrated this. She had sold me, her own daughter, like a commodity in a business transaction. By dawn, my grief had hardened into something else. Something cold and sharp and focused. They wanted to play games with my life? Fine. I would play too. But by my rules. I went home the next morning and found my mother in the breakfast room, perfectly coiffed as always, reading the financial section of the newspaper. "Good morning, darling," she said without looking up. "You're out early." "I need to talk to you about the wedding," I said, keeping my voice steady. She glanced up, her eyes sharp and assessing. "What about it?" "I want to move it up. I don't want to wait 3 more months. Let's do it in 6 weeks." Her surprise was barely visible, just a slight widening of her eyes. "That's very sudden. Why the rush?" I smiled, channeling every lesson she'd ever taught me about composure and strategy. "Because I'm in love, Mom. Because I don't want to wait." "Isn't that what you want? For me to marry Julian?" She studied me for a long moment, and I wondered if she could see through me, if she knew I'd discovered the truth. But then she smiled. Cool, satisfied, triumphant. "Of course, darling. If that's what you want, we'll make it happen. I'll call the venue today." "Thank you," I said, and walked away before she could see the rage burning beneath my composed exterior. The next 6 weeks were a masterclass in deception. I played the role of the ecstatic bride-to-be with Oscar-worthy precision. I cooed over flower arrangements, debated seating charts, and went through the motions of dress fittings. With Julian, I was warm but distant, claiming pre-wedding stress whenever he tried to address our fight. With my parents, I was dutiful and loving, never letting on that I knew what they'd done. But in secret, I was building my revenge. I started with my mother's assistant Claudia, a sharp woman in her 50s who'd worked for Victoria Ashford for 20 years. I invited her to lunch under the guise of wanting help with a wedding surprise for my mother. "Claudia," I said over salad at a quiet restaurant, "I need your help. I want to do something special for my mom at the wedding. Maybe a video montage or a speech. Can you help me gather information about her business dealings? I want to highlight her success." Claudia's eyes softened. "That's lovely, Sophia. Your mother would be so touched." Over the next week, Claudia unknowingly provided me with access to files, email chains, and documents that painted a damning picture. My mother hadn't just arranged a marriage alliance. She'd been planning this for years. She'd deliberately positioned Julian and me to meet, had paid off his previous girlfriend to disappear, had manipulated business conditions to force the Harcourt family into financial desperation. She'd orchestrated every detail of my life like a puppet master, and I'd been too blind to see the strings. But that wasn't all I discovered. There were other transactions, other arrangements that had nothing to do with me. My mother had been siphoning funds from Ashford Holdings into private accounts. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. She'd been embezzling from her own family's company, from my father, for years. And my father, my kind, jovial father, had discovered it 6 months ago. That's why he'd been so distant, so closed off. He'd confronted her, and she'd threatened him. If he exposed her, she'd claim he was having an affair, that he'd been the one embezzling, that he was mentally unstable. She'd destroy him. So he'd stayed silent, trapped in a marriage with a woman who'd become a stranger. I found this out by accident, stumbling upon a hidden folder on my father's laptop when I used his study to print wedding invitations. There were lawyer consultations, private investigator reports, bank statements highlighted with my mother's irregularities. My father was trying to build a case against her, but he was terrified. Terrified of losing everything, of the scandal, of what it would do to me. My heart broke for him. And my resolve strengthened. I needed one more piece of the puzzle. Julian's true motivations. Was he just a pawn like me, or was he a willing participant in this scheme? I got my answer 2 weeks before the wedding when I hired my own private investigator. A recommendation from a college friend whose parents had gone through a contentious divorce. The investigator's report was thorough and devastating. Julian had a girlfriend. Not just any girlfriend. Claire Morrison, a junior executive at Harcourt Industries. They'd been together for 3 years, overlapping entirely with his relationship with me. She knew about the engagement, knew about the marriage alliance, and was waiting for him. They had plans to be together once the merger was complete and the financial situation stabilized. There were photos, Julian and Claire at a restaurant 3 states away, thinking they were safe from prying eyes. Julian and Claire entering her apartment building. Text messages the investigator had managed to obtain through less than legal means. Messages that made it clear this wasn't just an affair. They were partners in this deception, counting down the days until Julian had secured the Ashford money and could divorce me with a hefty settlement. Just a few more weeks. One message read. Then we never have to pretend again. I sat in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by wedding presents from well-meaning relatives, and felt something inside me crystallize into diamond-hard clarity. They'd all used me. My mother, my fiancé, even Claire Morrison, who'd never met me but was perfectly willing to participate in destroying my life. They wanted a wedding? They would get a wedding. But not the one they expected. The day before the ceremony, I met with my father in his study. I closed the door and locked it, then placed the folder containing my mother's embezzlement evidence on his desk. "I know everything," I said quietly. My father's face crumpled. "Sophie, sweetheart, I wanted to protect you." "I know," I interrupted gently. "And I'm going to protect us both. But I need you to trust me. Tomorrow, during the ceremony, when I give you the signal, I need you to call the authorities. Can you do that?" He looked at the folder, then at me, confusion and hope warring in his expression. "What are you planning?" "Justice," I said simply. Finally, the truth. The wedding day dawned crisp and clear, the kind of perfect autumn morning that seemed designed for new beginnings. The venue was a historic mansion overlooking the harbor, decorated with thousands of white roses and orchids. 300 guests filled the gilded ballroom. The elite of society gathered to witness the union of 2 powerful families. I stood in the bridal suite, looking at myself in the mirror. The dress was a masterpiece. Vintage lace over silk, with a cathedral train that seemed to float behind me like sea foam. My hair was swept up, tiny diamonds woven through the dark strands. I looked like a princess from a fairy tale. But this wasn't a fairy tale. This was a reckoning. My mother swept in, resplendent in champagne silk. "Oh, darling, you look perfect. Absolutely perfect." She kissed my cheek, her perfume enveloping me. "I'm so proud of you." "Are you?" I asked, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "Really?" Something flickered in her expression. "Of course. This is everything I've ever wanted for you." "Everything you wanted," I echoed. "Not everything I wanted." She frowned. "Sophia, what?" "It's time," the wedding planner interrupted, poking her head in. "Are we ready?" I smiled, picking up my bouquet of white peonies. "Absolutely ready." The ceremony began. I walked down the aisle on my father's arm, and I could feel his tension, his confusion about what I planned. At the altar, Julian waited, devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo, his smile warm and loving for all the assembled guests. Behind him stood his father, Richard Harcourt, and his best man. In the front row, my mother sat with Julian's mother, both women radiating satisfaction. The officiant began the traditional words. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." I barely heard him. I was too focused on Julian's face, watching for cracks in his facade. He took my hands when prompted, his grip warm and steady, and for just a moment, I wondered if some small part of what we'd had was real. Then I caught a glimpse of movement in the back. A woman in a navy dress, trying to be inconspicuous. Claire Morrison. She'd come to watch her boyfriend marry someone else, unable to resist the spectacle. That decided it. When the officiant reached the part about objections, he paused. "If anyone here has reason why these two should not be wed, speak now or forever hold your peace." The silence was expectant. Comfortable. No one ever objected at weddings anymore. "Actually," I said clearly, "I object." The collective gasp from 300 guests sounded like wind through the room. Julian's hands tightened on mine, his eyes widening in shock. My mother half rose from her seat. "Sophia," Julian said urgently, quietly, "what are you doing?" I pulled my hands from his and turned to face the crowd. "I object because this wedding is based on a lie. Multiple lies, actually." "Sophia, stop this," my mother commanded, her voice cutting. I ignored her, addressing the room. "How many of you came here today believing this was a love match? How many of you thought you were witnessing something real and beautiful?" "Someone stops her," Richard Harcourt growled, moving toward the altar. "No," my father said, standing. His voice was louder than I'd heard it in months. "Let her speak." I nodded gratefully to him. The truth is, this wedding was arranged by my mother and Julian's father as a business merger. Julian was paid to court me, to propose to me, to convince me to marry him. All so that our families could access my trust fund and merge their companies. The murmuring grew louder. Julian reached for me. "Sophie, please, we can talk about this." "Can we, though?" I asked, pulling my phone from where I'd hidden it in the folds of my dress. "Can we talk about Claire Morrison? Your girlfriend of 3 years? The woman you've been seeing throughout our entire relationship? She's here, by the way." I pointed to the back, where Claire had gone pale. "Stand up, Claire. Let everyone see you." She bolted for the door, but the security I'd hired, positioned strategically throughout the venue, blocked her exit. Julian's composure shattered. How did I find out? Does it matter?" I turned back to the crowd, many of whom had their phones out now, recording. Perfect. But the real crime here isn't just emotional manipulation. It's financial fraud. My mother stood fully now, her face a mask of fury. "Sophia Ashford, you will stop this immediately." "Why?" "Because you'll be exposed as an embezzler." I asked. "Because everyone will know that for the past 7 years, you've been stealing from Ashford Holdings? From your own husband? From your own family's legacy." "You have no proof," she hissed. "Actually, I have extensive proof. Bank statements, email chains, wire transfers to offshore accounts." I looked at my father. "Dad, now would be good." My father pulled out his phone and made a call. Within minutes, the sound of sirens cut through the chaos in the ballroom. "You've also been manipulating stock prices with insider trading," I continued, because once I started, I couldn't stop. The words poured out of me like water from a broken dam. You've been using confidential information from Dad's business meetings to make personal investments. That's securities fraud, Mom. That's federal prison. The authorities entered the ballroom, and the scene descended into chaos. My mother tried to run, but she'd never been good at running. Only at pulling strings. They arrested her there, in front of everyone she'd wanted to impress, everyone she'd tried to dominate. Richard Harcourt was taken into custody as well for his role in the fraudulent merger attempt. Julian stood at the altar, abandoned, as his father was led away. He looked at me with something like horror. You destroyed everything. No, I said calmly. I exposed the truth. There's a difference. Claire Morrison was questioned but eventually released. Julian tried to follow her, but she pushed him away, screaming about how he'd ruined her life. It was almost poetic. In the aftermath, as guests filed out in shocked clusters, my father approached me. His eyes were wet with tears. You didn't have to sacrifice your wedding day for this. It wasn't my wedding, I told him, taking his hand. It was never mine. But now my life is. The story broke nationally within hours. Socialite exposes mother's embezzlement at own wedding, read one headline. Marriage fraud scheme unravels in dramatic altar scene, read another. I became briefly famous, which was uncomfortable, but I used the platform strategically. I gave one interview, to a respected journalist who'd covered white-collar crime for decades. I told the whole story. The manipulation, the lies, the elaborate scheme to use my life as a pawn in their business games. I named Julian and Claire, I described my mother's years of financial fraud. I exposed the rotten foundation beneath the glittering surface of high society. Public opinion was split at first. Some called me vindictive, said I should have handled it privately. But most saw it for what it was, a woman reclaiming her agency, refusing to be used anymore. The legal proceedings took months. My mother was convicted of embezzlement, securities fraud, and conspiracy. She received 10 years in federal prison. Richard Harcourt got 7 years for his role in the attempted fraud. Julian and Claire faced no criminal charges, but their reputations were destroyed. Last I heard, Julian was working in a mid-level position at a company in Seattle, as far from his old life as he could get. Claire moved abroad. My father and I worked to rebuild Ashford Holdings together. It wasn't easy. My mother had done significant damage, but we managed. More importantly, we rebuilt our relationship. We started having weekly dinners, just the two of us, talking about everything we'd never discussed before. He told me about his own parents' arranged marriage, about how he'd promised himself his child would marry for love. He wept when he explained how my mother had slowly changed from the woman he'd married, how power and greed had consumed her. I should have protected you, he said one evening, his voice breaking. You did, I assured him, by letting me protect myself. 2 years after the wedding that never was, I stood in the same venue, now under new management, for a different event. My father was launching a scholarship fund for young women in business, named in honor of his mother. As I watched him speak to the assembled crowd, I felt a sense of peace I'd never experienced before. Someone approached me at the reception afterward, a journalist who'd covered my story. Do you ever regret it? She asked. The way you handled everything? Some people say you could have resolved it more quietly. I considered the question. Did I regret the public exposure, the spectacle, the way I'd turned my wedding into a courtroom? Did I regret the months of media attention, the think pieces about family loyalty and women's autonomy, the endless analysis of my choices? No, I said finally. Quiet resolution would have meant quiet continuation. My mother would have found a way to escape consequences, Julian would have gotten what he wanted, and I would have spent my life wondering when the next betrayal would come. Sometimes, the only way to break a cycle is to shatter it completely. The journalist nodded, making notes. What would you say to other women who find themselves in similar situations? Trapped by family expectations or manipulative relationships? I thought about that carefully. I'd say that loyalty is important, but it has to flow both ways. When the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones harming you, you're not obligated to stay silent. Truth isn't betrayal. Lying is. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to play a role in someone else's script for your life. She thanked me and moved on. I stood there, looking out at the harbor through the mansion's windows, and felt something I'd been chasing for years. Freedom. My phone buzzed, a text from my father. "Come take a photo with me. This is your victory too." I smiled and went to join him. Because he was right. This wasn't just about revenge or exposure or justice. It was about reclaiming my story, rewriting my future, and refusing to let anyone else hold the pen. That night, driving home through the city lights, I thought about the girl I'd been on that almost wedding day. She'd been terrified, hurt, unsure if she was making the right choice. But she'd been brave enough to act, to speak up, to shatter the pretty lies everyone had worked so hard to maintain. I'd received letters over the past 2 years, dozens of them, from women and men who'd seen their own stories in mine. People who'd been manipulated by family, betrayed by partners, used as pawns in games they didn't understand. They thanked me for showing them that fighting back was possible, that speaking truth was powerful, that you could survive the destruction of everything you thought you knew and build something better from the ruins. One letter in particular stayed with me. A young woman named Maria wrote that she'd been engaged to a man her parents chose, that she'd felt trapped and alone, that she'd been planning to go through with it because she didn't think she had options. Then she saw my story and realized she did have a choice. She called off her wedding 3 weeks before the ceremony, stood up to her parents, and moved across the country to pursue the career she'd always wanted. "You showed me I could save myself," she wrote. "Thank you." That's when I knew. The humiliation, the media circus, the painful process of exposing my mother's crimes and my ex-fiancé's deception, it had all been worth it. Not just for me, but for everyone who needed to see that the emperor had no clothes, that pretty surfaces could hide ugly truths, and that sometimes burning it all down was the only way to see clearly. My father and I still run Ashford Holdings, and we've changed its culture completely. We've implemented transparency measures, ethics training, and whistleblower protections. We've made it clear that in our company, integrity matters more than profit. It's been good for business. Turns out people like doing business with companies they can trust. I never did get married, and I'm fine with that. I date occasionally, but I'm cautious now, perhaps overly so. I've learned to listen to my instincts, to pay attention to the small warning signs, to never ignore that voice in my head that says something isn't right. Some people might call it trust issues. I call it wisdom. Last month, I visited my mother in prison. It was the first time I'd seen her since the arrest. She looked older, smaller somehow, her elegance stripped away by institutional clothing and harsh lighting. We sat across from each other in the visiting room, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. "I suppose you're proud of yourself," she finally said, her voice bitter. "I'm not proud," I replied honestly. "I'm just free." She laughed, short and sharp. "Free. You destroyed your family for freedom. You destroyed our family long before I exposed what you'd done," I corrected gently. "I just refused to let you destroy me too." She looked away, and I saw something in her profile that might have been regret. Or maybe just anger at being caught. With my mother, it was always hard to tell. "Do you love me at all?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. She met my eyes, and for the first time in my life, I saw her completely unguarded. "I loved the daughter I imagined you could be. The one who would carry on my legacy, who would be everything I wanted to be. I don't know if I ever loved who you actually are." It hurt, but it was also honest. More honest than she'd ever been with me. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "At least now I know." I left the prison and drove to the beach, watching the waves crash against the shore. My mother's words should have devastated me, but instead, they felt like closure. She'd given me the truth finally, and the truth had set me free. The moral of my story isn't complicated. Loyalty without honesty is just complicity. Love without respect is just control. And sometimes, the people who are supposed to build you up are the ones tearing you down. And the only person who can save you is yourself. Family is supposed to be sacred, but not when that sanctity is used as a weapon. Not when tradition becomes a cage. Not when love is conditional on obedience. Real family, real love, celebrates your autonomy, honors your truth, and stands beside you even when it's uncomfortable. I learned that the hard way, standing at an altar in a wedding dress, choosing truth over comfort, exposure over silence, freedom over the illusion of belonging. It wasn't easy, and the aftermath was painful, but I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Because I'd rather be alone and authentic than surrounded by people who only love the version of me they can use. Some battles must be fought publicly, not because you want attention, but because sunlight is the best disinfectant. Some betrayals must be exposed, not for revenge, but for justice. Some relationships must be destroyed, not out of spite, but because they were built on foundations that could never hold. My father told me once, in the midst of rebuilding our lives, that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite the fear, speaking truth despite the cost, standing up despite knowing you might stand alone. I stood alone at that altar, and I spoke my truth, and the world as I knew it ended. But from those ashes, I built something better. A life that's actually mine. Remember this, the people who truly love you will never make you feel trapped, and the moment you realize you're in a cage, you owe it to yourself to find the key.